Giant globs of Globolite, one of my favorite chronos makes a return, and an indie MVP gets an LE. It's episode 89 of A Week in Watches, a semi-weekly look back at new releases and interesting stories from the watch industry. I'm Zach Weiss, co-founder of Worn Around, and I'll be your host today. There was a lot to choose from this week, so I just went with my favorites. Sorry to everything else. And don't worry, there isn't a story about the Moon Swatch being available online. Consider that sentence enough coverage of that. Christopher Ward lights up the deep. The C60 dive watches have always been a cornerstone of Christopher Ward's catalog. A line of contemporary divers with some vintage influences, they've always been defined by their value, good specs for a good price. Several generations in, one can chart the progress of the Christopher Ward brand by the C60. I first reviewed one in 2013, and it's remarkable to see how different they are today. A perfectly competent dive watch with a Solida movement for around $600, it was a great value, but the design felt like a mishmash with a wave dial, cathedral-esque hands, and typical baton and circle markers. And the finishing was nothing really to speak of. Now, a little over a decade later, the basic C60 has gone up in price some, starting closer to $900, but offers a more cohesive, contemporary design with all of the specs and features one could ask for, and finishing that belies its price tag. That's the basic model, but over the years, Christopher Ward has released various special editions and sublines that have taken the C60 into more rarefied territory, like the C60 Apex or C60 Concept, which featured skeletonized and high-end movement finishing on their in-house SH21 caliber, and the C60 Elite 1000, which maxed out water resistance at 1,000 meters. Now, Christopher Ward has announced their newest C60 variant, the Lume, which, as the name suggests, is all about light. This is clearest in the dial, which features 17 custom-shaped Globolite XP blocks. Globolite is a ceramic and superluminova composite that can be formed into any shape, glows super bright, and in all directions, as it's solid. Thus, markers can be seen from different angles. Christopher Ward uses this to good effect on the Lume by creating extremely tall baton markers for every hour, save 12, which is a large outline of a triangle. These appear to be at the maximum height they could have achieved before obstructing the hands, as they look absurdly tall for applied markers, which also looks very cool. Additionally, the Twin Flags logo is made of Globolite. The hands continue the treatment with thick slabs of Globolite. The hour and minute hands are the typical large arrow and straight sword of the C60 series, but skeletonized, with the Globolite outlining the hands for a sort of inverted look. The second hand is more straightforward, but also features Globolite on its tip. Though highly three-dimensional, the lack of metal housings for the applied markers and on hands gives the Lume a very graphic look that I find quite striking and appealing. The light theme continues to the case, which is created out of grade 2 titanium, so light because of the weight, not, light. While not the first time they've used titanium on a C60, the execution here looks a bit different. Coming in at 41 by 47.9 by 10.8 millimeters, which is a new size for a C60, the Lume has that classic dark titanium gray color and is pleasantly thin for a 300-meter diver. It also has a ceramic bezel with loomed numerals, a helium escape valve, and cool little bolt-on crown guards. Powering the C60 Lume is a chronometer-certified Solida SW300. Available in blue, gray, and orange, all of which have stippled surfaces and a slight dégradé effect, the C60 Lume comes in at $1,975 on a rubber strap, or $2,390 on a titanium bracelet with micro-adjust clasp. Clearly, this is a far cry from the $600 super value C60s of a decade ago, but I think, as anyone who has handled a Christopher Ward in the last few years can agree, they make watches that are worth what they charge. Apparently, the dial and hands on this model cost something like 4 times their usual to produce, just because of the Lume. Sinn brings back a killer chrono. I am personally very excited about this next one. Sinn has finally decided to pay some attention to one of my favorite watches from their archives, the 156. Not just reviving it, but seemingly breathing some new life into it as well. The 156 has an interesting story that I will do my best to sum up quickly here. It all starts with the Heuer Bundeswehr 1550 SG, aka the Heuer Bund, a military-issued flyback chronograph made in the 60s and 70s. It was an epic tool watch with a 43mm case and wide friction bezel that had a very distinct layout. In the 1980s, Helmut Sinn bought batches of decommissioned Bunds, serviced them, and rebadged them as Sinns, calling them the 155, which is a very interesting way of making a new watch, but let's not dwell on that too much. In the late 1980s, Sinn created the 156 as the next evolution of the Bund, upgraded with modern automatic chronograph movements, most notably the Lume 5100, the best chronograph movement that ever was, and yes, I'll fight over that. The 5100 was notoriously tough and could withstand high amounts of shock, making them perfect for pilot watches, earning them a place in the NATO chronographs made by Tutima for use by fighter jet pilots in the 90s. Not to mention going to space in the Sinn 142 and the Fortis Cosmonaut. But more importantly, they are central minute chronographs with day dates and 24-hour hands, like everything you could want in a movement. Anyway, the 156 retained the case and bezel design of the Bund and the overall look and feel of the dial as well, though altered to accommodate a different movement layout and with slightly different hands. The resulting watch is, in my humble opinion, one of the coolest watches ever made, combining the aggressive yet vintage style of the Bund with the super rugged Lume 5100. The original 156 was made for around 20 years and remains a relatively affordable gem for fans of neo-vintage watches. And that brings us to now, and Sinn's announcement of the 156.1 and 156.1e, a production watch and a limited edition, respectively. The 156.1 can be seen as the modern follow-up to the original 156. It's very faithful in its overall look and styling, though not exactly the same either, such as the use of red instead of orange, and features upgrades befitting of a modern Sinn. One seemingly obvious difference is the lack of a 24-hour subdial at 12. While this seems like a big departure, it is because of the movement used, which I will get to in a minute, but also has precedence, as there was a version of the 156 that used the Lume 5012 caliber with the same layout. Those seem to be incredibly rare, however, as I've literally never seen one come up for sale, and yes, I keep an eye out. The 156.1 is still 43mm, which is large but accurate, and 15.5mm tall, which is also about the same. The steel case is bead blasted and has drilled lugs, as it should. Some upgrades include 100-meter water resistance, a sapphire box crystal instead of acrylic, and the bezel is now Sinn's black hard coating over tegimented steel, so it should be very resistant to scratches. A logical touch. Powering the 156.1 is the Sinn SZ01 caliber, as Lume 5100s are sadly long out of production. Developed by Sinn and based on the Valjoux 7750, the SZ01 brings back the central minute counter of the Lume 5100. The SZ01 isn't new and has been featured in various Sinn watches before, but they don't use it very often either. Obviously, this was the correct choice for the 156.1. Sinn also announced a limited edition version, the 156.1e, which, well, is kind of a strange watch. I don't dislike it, I just don't quite get it. At a glance, it looks like a Fotina 156.1, which it sort of is, but it's also sort of a nod to the 155, or Hoyer Bund 2. You see, there's no use of color. Rather, ivory lume replaces any white lume that you would have found on the other version. The central seconds and minutes chronos are white rather than, say, a faded orange, which would have made sense for a 156. But to make matters weirder, the sub-second hand is painted ivory. It's not lume, but it looks like it's aged lume. Also, the bezel is dark gray rather than black for a slightly faded feel, which looks awesome, admittedly. And then there's the date window. Seemingly out of nowhere, or an IWC Mark 17, the date window has transformed from a square to an arc based on the Kolsman altimeter design, thus showing the current date as well as before and after. This is a very modern detail in the middle of a design that seems to be trying to look aged. Like I said, I just don't really get it. With that said, I think it looks kind of cool. The ivory color is appealing, the gray bezel is gorgeous, and the altimeter date balances with the text next to it. It's just so weird. Anyway, the 156.1 is priced at $4,540 on leather and $4,780 on steel. The 156.1e is limited to 300 pieces, costs $4,970, and includes both a strap and a bracelet. Both are available to order now. And if you're looking for a smaller version, you can get the Sinn 256, like I'm rocking here. Louis Erard teams up with an indie MVP. So far this year, we've seen Louis Erard launch a tourbillon with Alain Silberstein, and then a collaboration with Cedric Joner, a real insider's indie watchmaker. Some mainline pieces like a new enamel regulator, and a follow-up to their Metropolis in green. So a pretty solid year so far. But their newest launch is definitely the one that will turn the most heads, assuming those heads are attached to watch enthusiasts with an interest in independent watchmaking. Louis Erard has teamed up with Stefan Kuck, a German watchmaker whose popularity has boomed in indie circles in the last few years. Stefan Kuck's specialty is in movement engraving and finishing. His website is split into two categories, Kunstwerk and Handwerk. The former are his artistic creations where he painstakingly carves and engraves on movements, dials, and even cases to create whimsical works, such as the remarkable Kuck, which is, yes, a movement carved to look like an octopus. The handwerk line, in contrast, focuses on hand finishing of components and features a far more traditional aesthetic, as well as their first in-house caliber. In the last few years, these are the watches that have really caught on with collectors, as they offer a high level of fit and finish executed by hand at relatively reasonable prices for what they are. They start at around $9K. Kuck also won a GPHG award for the Kuck 2 model in 2019. This line serves as the aesthetic basis for the collaboration with Louis Erard. Based on the 42mm Excellence de Régulateur model, the Kuck models feature certain hallmarks of his designs, such as applied rhodium-plated tracks, heat-blued hands, an infinity symbol hour hand, and applied nameplates. 3 of the 4 models also feature matte surfaces in muted colors, making them truly look like they are part of Kuck's catalog. Speaking to traditional watch decoration, all versions also feature hour subdials with clou de Paris or hobnail textured surfaces, which adds a point of focus as well as makes the hour hands stand out for greater legibility. The Louis Erard x Stefan Kuck Les Régulateurs come in light blue, green, or purple for $5,250, or mother of pearl, which adds an extra layer of luxury, for $5,900. Blue and green are limited to 100 pieces, while purple and mother of pearl are limited to 78 pieces. And that's all I got for episode 89 of A Week in Watches. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Be sure to check out WarnerWound.com daily for more great watch content, and we'll see you next time.